And a good evening. This is States Rights Radio coming to you live from Washington, D.C. We're here going to have some political discussions with our good friend Tyler from New Jersey. How you doing, Tyler?
I'm doing great tonight. How are you doing?
Not bad, not bad. Bit of a tiring here, but I think we can spare a couple of minutes discussing what's going on in the world and the country. Let's talk first what I saw the last time. Legal, if I can call him legal scholar, Alan Dershowitz, came out and said that if Congress impeaches Trump, the Supreme Court can overrule that impeachment. Well, I mean, that's just an asinine statement that it's beyond belief. I just don't understand how he can say something like that. Because if that was so true, then Congress, the Supreme Court, and would have overruled the Andrew Johnson impeachment and the Clinton impeachment. So I just think that's such a justification, just a justifying and biased statement. What say you?
Well, I completely agree. The Supreme Court has really started to overstep its boundaries since they put Joseph Story on the bench, and it really increased with Hugo Black as well. And the Supreme Court, under the Constitution, has no power to tell Congress they can't impeach a president. Now, I believe the Supreme Court has the powers to interpret the Constitution in many ways, but none of that says they have the power to determine what Congress can do for impeachment. Since probably the 1850s, almost every president has done something that could warrant an impeachment. So I don't think. But Congress wouldn't have done to save Obama from an unfair impeachment or any of that. But like I said, I believe most presidents have done something to warrant an impeachment, but there's nowhere in the Constitution that allows the federal government to, in Article 3, to overturn a impeachment of the president. For example, Section 1 says the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court. Section 2 says the judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution. Again, it has nothing to do with impeachment. Subclause 2 has nothing to do with impeachment or 3. And it's happy says here, the trial of all crimes except in cases of impeachment shall be by a jury, and such trial shall be held in the state where the said crime shall have been committed. Now, it says except in cases of a jury, there should be except in cases of impeachment, they should be a jury, but it doesn't give the Supreme Court any other power to interfere in the impeachment process unless they're given a jury and the trial's not being held in the state where said crimes have been committed. Section 3 declares what the Supreme Court can interpret as treason, so nothing else. So the Supreme Court really can't protect Trump from any impeachment unless they look at a broad, because I know a lot of Democrats are saying they want to impeach him for treason. So the Supreme Court can't do anything unless they have a more Hamiltonian broad interpretation of Section 3 of Article 3 of the Constitution.
That's that's interesting, and you're absolutely right. I mean, you are totally absolutely right that the Supreme Court has no say unless it's something dire. But that's one of the I've always said that's one of the things of our government is that the executive, the legislative, and the judicial are separated from one another. That's why Trump cannot fire his attorney general or his staff, because that's why every branch must be independent. He may be appointed by the president, he may be nominated by the president, but that doesn't give him the right to let him go unless he has really caused a lot of damage. But one example that I keep repeating is the Saturday Night Massacre of Richard Nixon. That Richard Nixon, he told Elliot Richardson to fire Archibald Cox. Richardson said no. He resigned. He ordered his assistant attorney general to fire Cox. Ricklehouse was fired. And so finally came to Robert Bork, the Solicitor General and acting Attorney General, that took action, which, again, that was blatantly unconstitutional. It was a big constitutional crisis. So when I see these, Trumpsters and people in favor of President Trump that just say whatever is in their brain and whatever's in their stomach that has no legal bearing. It's just, I just want to laugh because it's so bogus when I hear Alan Dershowitz say this.
I can see your point, and it is, and I think for the most part it is bogus. But you're saying that you don't think the president has the power to fire one of his cabinet members?
Only if the cabinet member has made a damaging decision or a damaging thing, then he can request them to step down. I don't believe, if I could be wrong, but I don't believe the president has the power to fire him like Trump has fired Tillerson. I don't believe that is constitutional right, because yet again, he may have nominated Tillerson, but each branch must be independent from one another. That's why each department is investigated by a FOIA request, not the White House. The White House is exempted, but Congress and each department and agencies are subject to FOIA, but not the White House. So each department is independent from one another. Now, they report to the president. That is true. But I just don't think that he has any constitutional, and we saw it in the U.S. versus Richard Nixon. He can't do that.
See, I don't know, because I think there is actually historical precedent of firing certain cabinet members that they feel are hurting the administration's goals and the president's duty to execute the laws of the union. For example, as you know, the impeachment of President Andrew Johnson had to do with, he tried to fire his Secretary of War, I believe, and replace him with Ulysses S. Grant. But that, and Congress passed a law before that saying they can't do that, blah, 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 saying that the president cannot do that because it goes against the law. But in the deciding vote, of which Edmund G. Ross voted against impeachment, I feel like that settled that the president can fire his own cabinet members if he feels they are doing something to, you could say, block his attempts to execute to execute the office of the President of the United States.
Well, in that case with Andrew Johnson, the reason why he was also impeached was because he was a loyal Democrat from the South turned Republican, and he vetoed every single Reconstruction bill that actually hurt the South, his home state of Tennessee. So back then, the Congress was controlled by Republicans, radical Republicans from Pennsylvania and Ohio. So it was more like a vendetta against Johnson when he kept vetoing every single Reconstruction bill that came into his desk. So that's part of the reasons why also could be that, he fired Secretary of War, and that was, the last nail into the coffin. But, he also was vetoing every single bill, and Congress had enough. And they thought they had enough evidence to file impeachment charges. They didn't reach the Senate. It never does, because I don't think the Senate has never convicted anybody. And I don't know if they were with Trump, or they never did with Clinton. So, but again, they have to find some sort of a constitutional basis. And with Trump, I think every president, with not counting Coolidge, Taft, and Cleveland, has broken the U.S. Constitution tremendously. And I see that there could be charges brought up against each and every one of them. Even Harding, Hoover, FDR, etc. So,
well, definitely FDR. FDR, for example, signed in the National Recovery Act that was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court later. FDR had expanded the powers of the executive. FDR had used executive powers to advance his New Deal legislation, and the president is not the chief legislator in any means. He's only supposed to execute the laws of the union, not interpret or make his own laws. And I think a problem is we have given the chief executive the power of the legislator, and it really started getting big around. And what really started getting big is around President Bush, when President Bush, with his signing statements, would say in them how he interprets the law he's signing in, which takes away Congress's power of what they originally interpreted the law to do. So more and more, the president is becoming a chief legislator instead of a chief executive.
Oh, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right there, Tyler. And I've always kept saying that EOs are not legislation. I mean, but yet again, FDR signed Executive Order 9046, which opened up internment camps for Japanese Americans. Sadly, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled it constitutional. And just now, the Supreme Court ruled constitutional the ban on the Trump ban on Muslims and certain travel ban. That no surprising there, but we have opened a precedent of tyrant in chief. And I mean, you can go back to say that with Andrew Jackson, but the whole point of this republic was to keep the executive with minimal power. I don't know where people from the left and the right want to have a premier or a caudillo. I don't know where they get this idea. But I mean, that's not what this republic was established for. And I really hate it when now Republicans cheer for Trump's executive orders. And I didn't like it when Obama was doing it. I certainly don't like it when Trump is doing it. He's not the legislature.
Republicans didn't like it when Obama was doing it either. But now because now they're no longer the opposition party, so they don't have to be conservative anymore.
Correct. So now the Republican Party stands for big government, executive orders, and you might as well just vote Democrats. You might just elect that New York liberal from that young millennial from New York City, Alexandria Ocasio-Perez.
Yep, I agree exactly. It's they really become the Republicans, and it's sad because the Republicans always talk when they're out of power of how they're going to shrink government and then just expand it while they're in power. I think the last real hair of conservatism in the Senate is Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, and Mike Lee. They're the only senators who actually rule by the Constitution, it seems.
Well, you mentioned Rand Paul. I am starting to see that Rand Paul is not the conservative, and his father in some issues, but not at all. Mike Lee, yes. Ted Cruz here and there. I would say Mike Lee, Jeff Flake are the last remaining Ketonians in the Senate that will stand up against executive power.
I can see your position. I don't like Jeff Flake, but I can see the appeal he has. Now, I believe we need more. We need to get rid of the two-party system. It has failed.
Yes.
It has failed in every right. People are no longer represented. And that brings another issue of what is real representation. For example, George Washington said that they originally wanted to have representation, one representative for every 40,000 people. George Washington said that was too small. Then they said for every 30,000 people. George Washington compromised and agreed to that, but he even still personally thought that was too small. And now we have one representative for every 700 and something thousand people. So people aren't being represented anymore, and therefore I believe if we got rid of it, there could be a lot more conservatives in Congress if we really stop trying to expand how many representatives for how many people.
Well, you're right there. I mean, I don't mind much the U.S. House, but the U.S. House of Representatives, because that is the people's body, and it is based on population growth. What again, we've touched on this issue before, is the U.S. Senate, of course. And I remember that in my political science class a long time ago, my political science professor was saying that Germany's upper house, I believe is the Bundestag, is kind of like the Senate chamber. And there they have proportional representation, and they have senators with population. And I raised my hand and I said, well, that's all very fine and dandy. But here, the senators are not like that. The senators don't represent the people.
In Germany, ever since really the unification of Germany in 1871, the German states have no longer any power, so therefore the senators are not representing their individual regions or in sections. They're really just another representative. And now I'm not arguing for that. I'm arguing to see more conservatives in the Senate or constitutionalists. I mean the House of Representatives. We need to really look at reforming the proportion system, but I'd be against any and all proportion system when it comes to the Senate, because the Senate's key job is to represent the people. For example, if you look at the writings of
you mean to represent the state, not the people?
The people of the states. Yes, that's what I meant. But for example, the Oliver Ellsworth said, the Constitution does not attempt to coerce sovereign bodies, states, in their political capacity. And Oliver Ellsworth, what he meant by that was that the Constitution is not giving the federal government the power to tell the states what to do, but through the senators, the states have the power to tell what the government is supposed to do.
Absolutely right. And just going back to Germany, where my political science professor was saying that they have popular representation, and even Germany has a federal republic nowadays. Brazil has one, Mexico has one, but yet again they've tried to copy so much the United States that still the power lies in Berlin, Brasilia, Mexico City, and they cannot have what we have. We don't want Mexico. I lived in Mexico for 4 years, and it's a joke. Their Federalist Republic. It is an utter joke. They have their so-called state legislatures in each of the 31 states, but all the power lies in Mexico City. So the laws that pass.
The problem that comes from is that they're trying to copy, yes, a lot like the U.S., but they're also trying to copy democracy, the full Scott, as I called it, because they want things will get better if all the people have power. If all the people have power, when that's not true. When all the people have power, state sovereignty goes away, and every issue becomes a national issue.
Correct.
That was the exact thing our framers warned against, is everything becoming a national issue. For example, James Wilson on October 6, 1787 said, in delegation, federal powers, and says about enumeration, delegation allows federal powers that were necessary to form the government, but all other powers that aren't given in Article 1, Section 8 were reserved to the states, because Wilson, when he said this in front of the people of Pennsylvania, knew if we didn't put any limits on the government, every issue will become a national issue. And through the Supreme Court, which has expanded its power, every issue has become a national issue, from abortion to marijuana to gun rights and gun control to regulation to you name it, and it's become a national issue. Imagine if it didn't matter who controlled Congress, or who the president was, or who the Supreme Court was. Imagine if every part of the government stayed within its bounds in the Constitution. Imagine how much happier the country would be. Now, that would mean every election, 50% of the country wouldn't be calling for a revolution because of how angry they are. That means the other 50% was like, okay, we lost this round, but we still control our states.
You're right. You're absolutely right. When you give too much people that kind of power, all the issues become national. And that's why people don't even know they're state legislators or governors. And they all think that all power comes from Washington, D.C., and that is not how it's supposed to be. That is not how it's supposed to be. Power doesn't come from the central government. Power comes from the states, and the state takes the power, and the federal government administers that power. I do believe that the Commerce Clause, and I'll just say one more thing, and then we'll jump to another issue. The Commerce Clause, I don't believe the Founding Fathers meant to say to regulate commerce. I think the word that they were trying to use, because if you see that all the things that they were trying to do with the federal government is to administer commerce.
That's exactly true. Because if you look at the history leading up to the Constitution and then the ratification debates, the entire part of the Commerce Clause is actually to get rid of any regulation when it comes to commerce. For example, when the Confederation Congress asked for money, New Jersey refused to pay up. they said, we're not going to send any money to Confederation Congress. So the Congress sent Charles Pinckney to the New Jersey state legislature, and Pinckney was like, why won't you guys pay to the Congress? And they said, we won't pay because our money will go to will help New York, and New York is laying tariffs on New Jerseyan goods, which forces the New Jerseyan citizens to pay when they want to trade in New York. So at the Constitutional Convention, the convention delegates thought, okay, we need to make sure something like New York and New Jersey doesn't happen, so they introduced the Commerce Clause. And then Pendleton, who was one of the former supporters of it, said on how it should act. He said, trade and manufacturers should both be free in terms of states. James Madison said, the same want of general power over commerce led to an exercise of this power separately by the states, which not only proved abortive, but engendered rivalry, conflicting, and hurtful regulations, and in sundry instances treated citizens of other states as aliens. So the entire point of the Commerce Clause is actually to get rid of any regulation between the states. For example, in Federalist Number 42, they define the Commerce Clause as superintending authority over the reciprocal trade of confederated states. Alexander Hamilton, in Federalist Number 11, wrote, an unrestrained intercourse between the states themselves to advance the trade of each by interchange of their respective productivities, not only for the supply of reciprocal wants at home or out of foreign interests. So the entire point of the Commerce Clause is actually to get rid of regulation, not make more.
Correct. You're absolutely right. And, James Madison, when I see Trump or Obama or W, when they have their elaborate State of the Union addresses, which I think State of the Union addresses should be just send your documentation to Congress and then let them be the end of it, not this dog and pony show, but that,
Wilson started that.
Oh, of course, yeah. The favorite of New Jersey and the unfavorite of New Jersey and the unfavorite of Virginia, Woodrow Wilson, of course. But every time I hear Trump or Obama or W or Clinton say that we gotta fix the infrastructure, hospital, schools, blah blah blah, James Madison vetoed a public works bill, calling it unconstitutional.
So did James Monroe. He said,
exactly.
I'll gladly sign it into law once you pass a constitutional amendment. The Congress and the government in general has no power to enforce infrastructure that is a state duty only. For example, the only clause in the Constitution that talks about infrastructure is the Post Roads and Internal Improvement Clause of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 7, which has to establish post offices and post roads. Well, on September 4, 1787, James McHenry remarked in a journal written during the Philadelphia Convention, upon looking over the Constitution, it does not appear that the national legislature can erect lighthouses or clean out or preserve the navigation of harbors. McHenry thought it should, and he spoke to Nathaniel Gorham of Massachusetts and Gouverneur Morse and Thomas Fitzmans of Pennsylvania about the issue. Morse and Fitzmans agreed with McHenry. Morse and Fitzmans agreed with McHenry, but Morse suggested that Congress could do under the General Welfare Clause or the Commerce Clause. Benjamin Franklin opposed this. James Wilson opposed this. Rufus King opposed this. Roger Sherman opposed this, and Tench Coxe opposed this, and James Madison all opposed this, and the issue was dropped by Congress, and they all agreed that Congress does not have the power to do internal improvements unless it is to establish post offices and post roads, or if the general welfare, which means the national defense of the country, requires it. For example, President Eisenhower's massive infrastructure when it came to highways was constitutional because it had to do with national defense, and it was in case of a Soviet nuclear attack where the military could quickly get across the country when we were at an all-time high with the Soviet Union. So that was constitutional. But in peacetime, when we're not facing a nuclear threat like that, no, Congress cannot establish any infrastructure bills at all. Well, it cannot use the General Welfare Clause or the Commerce Clause.
And you're right there. One last thought. We have 5 minutes. One last thought. Yeah, you bring up Eisenhower, that he built up the interstate highway system due because of the height of the Cold War, and we'll bring up Russia in these remaining 5 minutes. You're right. You're absolutely right. But I think Eisenhower used that as an excuse to pass this legislation. But if you really get down to the nitty-gritty of it, I think what Eisenhower did was unconstitutional, regardless of what he said, that it was to protect America from the Soviets or whatever. So I think that there was other ways to do it besides having the federal government take over the highway system in each and every state.
Well, you could argue that. But then again, Eisenhower didn't pass it. Congress passed it with the express purpose of it being a military bill, and Eisenhower signed it into law. So I don't think you can really blame Eisenhower.
Well, but Eisenhower proposed it.
Eisenhower proposed it, but he made it as a recommendation. He had no legislative power, but he didn't propose how Congress should go about it, and he didn't dictate the entire bill to Congress.
Yeah, I mean, I understand there, but I think by proposing such a legislation and making up an excuse to build a highway system just like the Autobahn in Germany, I think Eisenhower, which he was a very good general, and I would prefer him more as a general than a president, I think he acted a bit unconstitutional because I think he made a phony excuse on that. But anyway, we could agree to disagree, or we'll continue on this. But one final thought on this whole Russia thing that happened in Helsinki. What are your thoughts about it? I mean, all the Trumpsters out there are saying that Clinton was buddies with Putin, Obama, all the way up to FDR with Stalin. So what's your take on it?
I think the left is freaking out a bunch about this, and I actually like what President Trump is doing, pursuing diplomatic relations instead of aggression. I would actually prefer we lift all sanctions on Russia, lift all sanctions on Syria and other states, and return to what Thomas Jefferson said in his 1801 address: peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all, entangling alliances with none. Or as Washington said, America must put out a helping hand in order to improve its relations. Or as Henry Clay said, America can advance liberty not by arms or embargoes, but through free trade and peaceful diplomatic relations. We can't get involved in every conflict. I don't think Obama should have gotten involved with Ukraine or Syria or Libya. I don't think Bush should have got involved in Iraq. I don't think Clinton should have gotten involved in Yugoslavia or in Somalia. I don't think Reagan should have gotten involved in Grenada. I don't think Eisenhower should have got involved in Vietnam. And I don't think we should have gotten involved in the banana wars with Theodore Roosevelt. I think America needs to return to a Jeffersonian model of government, not getting involved and not showing military force for everything. We need to follow what John Adams did to get peace with France, pursue diplomatic relations, and work out our differences. Adams averted us going into a war we might not have been able to win. We need to follow an approach like that.
Okay. No, that's true. I do agree with that. Jefferson did say those things, and he did send us to war with the Barbary Pirates, but that's only because the Barbary Pirates started to attack U.S. naval ships and U.S. commerce ships. So Jefferson had to. He didn't seek congressional approval of war, but he did. That was one act that he did because we were attacked unprovoked. So, but you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, I think that we should. I mean, I don't trust Putin. But
I don't trust him either. I think he's a liar, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue diplomatic relations. Yeah. I think every country, whether it be Cuba, Syria, Libya, Russia, or God, what's the name of it? In between Russia and Poland,
Ukraine?
No, not Ukraine. It's the other one. Belarus. I think we need to lift all sanctions, and I think we need to pursue free trade. The best way to advance freedom and prosperity is through free trade.
Okay, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. We should always focus on free trade, no tariffs, and you're absolutely right. Commerce all around the world and peace and diplomacy. Tyler, it's always been a pleasure talking to you. Every day it's enlightening, and I hope our listeners listen to this and get some information. Have yourself a wonderful week ahead, and we will talk later on.
Yep. All right. Time for states' what? For states' rights.
For states' rights, always. Thanks so much, Tyler.
Yep. Bye.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard a little political discussions with Mr. Tyler, New Jersey Libertarian. I hope you do follow him on Twitter and Instagram if he has, and myself too. And hope you find this chat interesting, and hope to tune in next time. For states' rights, always, thank you, and good evening.